The immediate impression of contract-first application development is mostly on RESTful services. It's just because of the popularity on OpenAPI specs. In the specs, you will probably find information on all the available endpoints, the operations of the endpoints, input and output of each operations, right? And then you would also have data format, schemas on those inputs and outputs. And sometimes you'll find authentication methods on top of it, right? So that's what people were looking for when they're trying to talk to the services. So having the specs or the contracts makes things work a lot more transparent. Developers now more aware and know what to expect from each endpoint. And that also makes the team better communicated. And if you list all the specs and making them available for the larger audience, it makes the reuse of the services a lot more easier as well. But in asynchronous communication or the event-driven world, things are not that easy. Instead of direct feedback from the receiving end, and that's the caller knows problem immediately when it occurred, the data providers normally just talks to a broker, topics, or queue. So the sole responsibility for those broker, topics, or queue is just to keep those events stored somewhere safe and replicating it if we need to serve more consumers, right? So if something was sent to the receiving end or the consumer with an unexpected format, things might not go so well. But asynchronous events are not easy because you could be using different protocols, the data shapes and the expected data format are obviously not the same. And on top of that, you need to also share what kind of serialize or deserialization mechanisms, right? And then there's also the old versioning problems. Is it backward compatible? Is there a place for a team to view your schemas? And last but not least, validation for schema is crucial before sending the data. Obviously, it's a very difficult problem to tackle, but let's just focus on the most popular solution, Kafka. If you ask me what Kafka is a high throughput, efficient, reliable, and highly scalable event store. If you ask me about Kafka, the first thing coming to my mind is, well, Kafka is super fast. Kafka utilizes an append-only log mechanism for fast data read and write. And it also uses a binary format, so the chunks of data are directly sent from point to point. And then it gets replicated into different partitions. So as a developer, you need to know that producers and consumers communicated through topics, which is similar to the same old messaging days. But rather than sending plain text like JSON or XML, binary representation is more compact and efficient. And using Avril or Protobuf, you can serialize or deserialize the data, and they both provide schemas in order to serialize these data or deserialize them. And this is how it works. First, a designer or someone from the team will be responsible for generating or creating a schema, and he or she will then upload the schema to the service registry. And then the service registry will store the uploaded schema into persistent store. The persistent store could be database, Kafka Topics, or even a cache. Developers can now come into the registry and take a look at the list and grab the schema by looking up the topic name they're trying to connect. So there's many ways to utilize the data that you have just grabbed. One way is to decouple the data structure from a connector. But in our case, I will be using Camel or Quarkus application. Therefore, we want to use the schema to generate Java classes or Java object, so we can play with the data, such as using the value to do some kind of side calculations, or process some business logic or integration logic. And now we have the schema ready, which is the contract. We are now able to implement the contract. We will be using the Camel framework to help us and build the application. First, we need to use the Maven plugin libraries to download and cache the schema locally, and using that schema to generate Java code and classes, so we know exactly what data shape looks like. And we will be using the Kafka component from the Camel framework. It just comes out right out of the box with all the libraries it needs. So all I need to do is just to configure where the brokers are, the user IDs and password, all of the authentication content, and other things you want to control. Your Kafka, basically, all you need to do is to configure. And then I have the choice of using either the Camel built-in components or the Apicurio Registry libraries to marshal, serialize, or unmarshal, deserialize the binary message coming from Kafka. For the built-in components, you will need to deliberately tell the Camel route what to do. And to use the Apicurio Registry libraries, you just need to add the configuration into the Kafka components like what you just did before. One of the configuration you need to do is to tell the Kafka configuration which serialized or deserialized libraries you need to grab from the registry libraries, and also you need to configure the location of the service registry. Of course, you need to make sure you have all the dependencies in your Maven profile. Then I'm going to go ahead and implement the integration of this logic using the Java code, and since everything is Pojo now, it's a lot easier for me to play around with everything. And then when I'm done, I can send the result to the end destination. Could be a topic, could be a database, could be anything that Camel is able to connect to. So that concludes how you consume events using contract-first application development. Well, publishing is almost the same, but just think of everything in reverse. So once you have all your data ready, or once you have the data coming in from external services such as Twitter that I have here, you can marshal or serialize into a binary format. So things work the same here. You get to choose either using the same Camel built-in components or using the Apicurio Registry libraries. And then once you're done with serialization, basically it's sent to Kafka Topics. And we're done. I hope you noticed that Kafka relies very heavily on the client side to do a lot of things, such as the schema validation, the data serialization. Everything happens in the client side. So using those registry libraries and the Camel components will help you tremendously. So that concludes my overview of how do you do contract-first application development in an event-driven way with Kafka, Apicurio Registry, and Camel. Thank you.